Well, the sad truth is that there are fewer and fewer people covering courts. And even though it's an extremely important part of our culture, it's an extremely fascinating area in which to be a journalist, a lot of news entities are cutting back on their court coverage. And if you're going to cover a court or cover a trial in some way, chances are you'll be a reporter doing something else, and then you'll be sort of moved into this role for the period of that specific trial. So I'm just going to touch base on a little bit about court coverage, recognizing that if there's an individual need, you'll certainly get more instruction as it goes on, but you can get just kind of a touch as to what you might need to know as you move forward into this court dynamic. I got to be honest, covering courts is a lot like covering sports. You sit in the stands, you're not involved in any way. You really cover the action that happens in front of you, and you tell who won, ultimately. So a lot of it is getting accurate information about what's going on with the witnesses, with the judge, with the attorneys. They can be very boring because it takes a long time for some trials to play out, and really there's a lot of watching and a lot of waiting and a lot of kind of documenting what's happening. The main things that you need to know is you have to do your homework before you get there. There's no opportunity to ask people questions while things are going on. You are there as an observer and a recorder. You have to be able to navigate court records. So, start getting used to looking online at different court records, being able to read them. Before you ever go into a courtroom, you're going to want to talk to attorneys and ask them about the case that you're going to be covering, about what's involved in it, what you need to know. When I was involved in covering courts, you would go look at the docket and be able to see different cases that would come up that would be interesting for you. As I said, that's unlikely to be happening now with the way that court coverage is going, but it still could be an opportunity for you to enterprise some stories. You look up the background, you get the facts going. You have to make sure that you are there for the action, so especially the opening and closing statements, whenever there's testimony of someone who is crucial to the trial. If you're covering a murder trial, you want to be there when the victim's mother's there. You want to, do you have to be there for every single witness? Maybe not. It really depends on the length of the trial and what kind of information that you're looking for. You have to be there for the verdict. And then remember, verdict. The first and most important thing that you'll need to do before you start covering a trial is to get information. So do your homework, make sure that you know how to navigate the court records and that you have gone through the records to see what exactly the filings are, what exactly the case is about, who the attorneys are, what are the circumstances? When I was a reporter, I used to go look through the court documents to see if there were stories. You're going to have less opportunity to do that now, but it still could be a place to enterprise stories. When you are involved in covering a trial, make sure that you get the background, that you check all the facts. Remember that you're an observer, so you do not have the opportunity to ask questions while you're there. You need to come armed with a great deal of information. Make sure you are there when it counts. This is not something you can, stop by and pick up a few quotes and then leave. You have to be there for opening statements, closing statements, crucial testimony, the verdict, of course, and then the sentencing comes subsequent to the verdict. So you'll need to come back at that point and get the sentencing as well. You can't trust what the lawyers tell you. Remember that the lawyers are each very vested in their side of this argument. You have to make sure to get both sides. You have to make sure to get as much, balanced and impartial information as you can. And you ultimately stay neutral. It really doesn't matter what you're hearing, what you think. If you're listening to testimony and you're like, oh my God, this guy is so guilty, no one cares what you think, and I'm sorry to say that, but really all that matters is what's transpiring in front of you, and you need to be a storyteller about that with description. I mean, if the murder victim's mother shows up and she's wearing a sequined Mickey Mouse shirt, maybe that's relevant. So that's the kind of stuff you want to write that stuff down. You want to be this teller of the story of what's transpiring in front of you, not just the facts as you are viewing them, but more of a narrative. It's important to understand courts before you head into that. So I'm just going to give you a really quick primer on some things you need to know about courts and procedures. There are different levels of court proceedings. Misdemeanors are minor offenses. They're punishable often by fines or really short jail time. They may not be many of the stories that you face. Felonies are often things that we cover more. Those are really serious crimes, so murders, rapes, and they have more severe punishments, of course. And then there are civil suits, which is a resolution of a dispute between two parties. So this is not the state bringing a case against someone. This is more two people who are facing off. So when you have a misdemeanor, things happen a little bit quicker. These are some of the things that you may hear these terms, in terms of the charges and the arraignment, which is where it is determined whether or not what the charges are read to the person who's been arrested. There may be a pretrial conference and motions. Most of these cases never make it to a trial. If they do, it's going to be a judge or a jury, and then the verdict or the sentencing occurs right away. But most of the time, this stuff will get what we call pled down. There'll be some sort of plea proceeding that takes place behind the scenes, and it never goes in front of any type of judicial situation. Now, felonies, you're arrested, you make a court appearance, there's either a grand jury or preliminary hearing which will determine if there's enough evidence to actually hold you over for trial, then you're arraigned. There's, again, pretrial conferences and motions, and then a trial, very often a trial with a jury. That's when you get called for jury duty. You're primarily doing these kind of cases. And then there's a verdict in sentencing, and then there can be appeals depending on what that verdict is. So it is more likely, if you're going to be covering a court trial, that you'll be covering something that has more magnitude, like a felony. Or a civil suit, which can be, incredibly interesting. So when you have two parties that, especially, companies that are fighting each other over trademarks or, patent infringement, that kind of thing, this is where you may get some pretty interesting court action. So in this case, we're looking at damages, and that can be a pretty interesting and compelling story to tell. So these are the kind of things that you might face as a reporter covering courts, but recognize the opportunity to be a court reporter itself is getting much smaller.